A millionaire CEO got into his car, ready for another day of business, until a little girl in the back seat looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Shut up." What she told him next left him frozen, questioning everything he thought he knew about his life and his family. Shut up. The words didn't just enter Michael's ears. They slammed into him like an unexpected punch. For a split second, he thought he'd misheard. People didn't talk to Michael Carter like that. Not his employees, not his business rivals, not even his own family. The air inside the sleek black Mercedes seemed to freeze around him. He stayed half-bent, one polished leather shoe on the pavement, the other just inside the car. His hand still gripped the top of the open door, but his eyes were locked on the source of that small, sharp voice. In the back seat, sitting as if she owned the space, was a little black girl, no older than 6 or 7. She had deep, soulful brown eyes that were far too knowing for someone so young. Each braid in her hair was tipped with a colorful bead, and the faint click of them echoed in the quiet car every time she moved her head. Her tiny chin was lifted just enough to give her an air of defiance, not bratty, but firm, like she had already decided she wasn't afraid of him. And that stunned Michael. People usually softened around him, their tones careful, their smiles polite. Even the most aggressive board members chose their words with surgical precision when he was in the room. After all, Michael Carter was more than a man. He was a name, a brand. The youngest self-made CEO in his industry, worth more money than some small countries. His time was valuable, his approval priceless, and his temper. Well, it was better not to test it. Yet here was this tiny stranger, looking him dead in the eye and telling him to shut up. For a heartbeat, Michael didn't know how to respond. It was so wildly out of the ordinary that his brain struggled to process it. His instinct, the one he used in hostile boardrooms, was to put the offender in their place. But his curiosity managed to wedge itself between his pride and his tongue. "Excuse me." His voice came out clipped, halfway between shock and annoyance. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't lower her gaze or fidget like most adults did under his stare. Instead, she repeated herself, slowly this time, as if she were speaking to someone who needed help understanding simple instructions. "I said, shut up. You're talking too much, and you're making her sad." Her. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Michael's eyes darted around the car, scanning the spotless leather seats and tinted windows. He didn't see anyone else. No, her. That could explain what this little girl was talking about. "What are you talking about?" His voice sharpened, the CEO tone slipping back in. "Who is her? And more importantly, why are you in my car?" He turned his gaze toward the front. His driver, James, sat rigid behind the wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if the traffic lights were the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. "James," Michael said, his voice low and edged, "I'm going to need you to explain this. Now." But before James could open his mouth, the girl leaned forward slightly, her beads clinking together. "You don't have to talk to him. I can tell you myself." Michael raised an eyebrow, a part of him both irritated and intrigued. "Oh, and you are?" "Amara," she said simply, like it should mean something to him. Her voice carried a strange mix of innocence and certainty, the kind of tone you'd expect from a teacher correcting a student. Not a child speaking to a man who could buy an entire building just for the fun of it. "And this? Her you're talking about?" Michael pressed. Amara's expression softened, but her gaze never left his. She pointed to the empty space beside her on the seat, a seat that, to Michael, was completely unoccupied. "She's right here. But you can't see her." Michael's jaw tightened. "Can't see her? What is this? Some kind of game?" "It's not a game," Amara replied. "It's just you don't listen. You talk about yourself all the time, your work, your deals, your problems. And she's sad because of it." Michael stared at the spot she was pointing to, the pristine leather seat that reflected a faint glimmer of daylight from the tinted glass. His mind wanted to dismiss her words immediately, to chalk this entire situation up to some bizarre mix-up. But there was something in Amara's tone that stopped him. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't childish exaggeration. It was certain. James cleared his throat quietly from front, a small sound that seemed far too loud in the tense silence. Michael's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. James didn't meet his gaze, but his knuckles were tight around the steering wheel. "I don't have time for riddles," Michael finally said, straightening his posture as he stepped fully into the car and shut the door. The soft thunk of it closing sealed the quiet inside, like a jar. "So unless someone here can give me a logical explanation." "Shut up." This time, Amara's words weren't loud, but they were sharper, like a needle pricking a balloon. She leaned forward, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. "If you stop talking for just a minute, you might hear her. But you're too busy filling the air with your noise to notice anything else." Michael opened his mouth, ready to fire back, but something about the way she looked at him, steady, unblinking, utterly certain, made the words catch in his throat. He leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing, his mind trying to decide whether this was absurd or the most unsettlingly real thing he'd ever experienced. The driver, James, shifted uncomfortably in the front seat, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror and away again. He looked like a man who had accidentally stepped on a landmine and was now trying very hard not to move. His Adam's apple bobbed once as he swallowed. "Sir," James began, his voice low, hesitant, like someone carefully choosing their words in front of a sleeping tiger. "I was going to explain." Michael's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Explain now. Who is this child and why is she in my car?" He wasn't shouting, but the authority in his tone carried weight. Decades of boardroom battles had taught him how to demand answers without raising his voice. And yet, for some reason, James didn't immediately answer. Before the driver could even open his mouth, the girl, small, calm, and impossibly self-assured for her age, crossed her arms. Her colorful braids clicked softly with the movement. "I'm not just this child," she said, tilting her chin upward. The words weren't petulant. They were matter-of-fact, as if she was correcting a simple mistake. "My name is Amara, and I'm here because," well, she paused for a heartbeat, and for the first time her gaze flickered downward, just for a moment. "She needs me." Michael's brows pulled together. "She," he repeated, his voice carrying a faint edge of impatience. Amara lifted one small hand and pointed to the seat beside her. The smooth, spotless leather, empty except for the faint indentation of the stitching. "Her," Amara said plainly, "but you can't see her. Not unless you listen." The back of Michael's neck prickled. He glanced from the empty seat back to Amara, searching for a smirk or some hint that this was a joke. But her eyes were steady, dark, and unervingly calm, like she wasn't just saying something for the sake of it. She believed it. Michael blinked, his mind shifting into assessment mode. Invisible friend, he thought. That had to be it. He'd seen kids cling to imaginary companions before. It was harmless, even cute, in the right setting. But this? In his car? Without his consent? That was something else entirely. "James," Michael said sharply, his voice bouncing off the quiet luxury of the Mercedes interior. "Pull over." Before he could finish, Amara's voice slipped in again, softer this time. Not timid, just gentler, as if the words she was about to say carried a different kind of weight. "She's crying," Amara murmured, her gaze not on Michael now, but on that empty space beside her. "Because you keep talking about how busy you are, how tired you are, how nothing ever goes your way." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't like how specific that sounded. He had, in fact, been muttering something along those lines on the phone earlier that morning, about stress, deadlines, and the never-ending problems that came with running an empire. But that had been to his assistant, in his office. Amara couldn't possibly know that. "She hears you," the girl added, her voice low and even. Michael felt something tighten in his chest. "Who hears me?" he asked, the word sharper than he intended. Amara's gaze lifted from the empty seat and locked directly onto his. There was no hesitation in her tone, no uncertainty in her choice of words. "Your daughter." The world seemed to narrow to just those two words. The hum of the car engine faded in Michael's ears. He stared at Amara, his expression caught between disbelief and something far more dangerous, the kind of reaction that comes when someone unknowingly touches an old, buried wound. "My daughter?" Michael's voice had dropped almost involuntarily, and it no longer carried the crisp, controlled authority of the CEO. It was quieter now, heavier. He had no living daughter. Not in the way people assumed when they heard the word. Years ago, there had been Lena, the only person who could make him forget about work for more than a few hours. And with Lena had come a promise of something new, something fragile and beautiful. A baby on the way. But all of that had been ripped away one rainy night, with a phone call that had shattered him. Michael's jaw flexed once. He searched Amara's face for clues, a tell that she was guessing, or bluffing, or fishing for a reaction. But her eyes didn't waver. How do you know about that? His voice was sharper now, but underneath it was something else, a thread of unease. Amara didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced back at the seat beside her. The seat she insisted wasn't empty at all. Then she looked at him again, her tone steady and sure. She told me, Amara said simply. The car seemed to grow warmer, the air heavier. Michael leaned forward slightly, his gaze locked on the little girl. She told you, he repeated. Yes, Amara replied. And she's been waiting for you to listen. There was a silence after that, not the casual kind that filled boardrooms when people were thinking, but the thick, almost tangible kind that carried weight. Michael sat back slowly, his thoughts racing. James's hands were still tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had changed, cars passing, people walking, life continuing. But inside the Mercedes, something had shifted. Michael had walked into the car, thinking he was in control of the situation, as always. Now he wasn't so sure. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't tell James to pull over again. Michael felt his chest tighten, as if an invisible hand had gripped it. My daughter? The words escaped him in a whisper, rough around the edges, almost foreign in his own voice. He hadn't said those two words out loud in years, maybe not since the funeral. But he didn't have a daughter. Not anymore. The thought came like a jagged shard, cutting through the mental armor he'd worn for so long. Memories stirred in the corners of his mind, uninvited. Years ago, before the skyscrapers and shareholder meetings, before the kind of wealth that made headlines, there had been Lena. Lena, with her easy laugh that could melt the tension out of any room. Lena, who had never cared about the price tag on a dinner or the size of the house they lived in. She had been his anchor in a world he didn't realize was slowly pulling him away from himself. And then there had been the promise, the late-night talks about baby names, the gentle hand resting on her growing belly, the plans for a nursery filled with sunlight. All of it gone in one rainy night. The phone call had come while he was in the middle of a late meeting, his desk still cluttered with contracts and projections. The voice on the other end had been clinical, almost detached, as they explained there had been a car accident. Lena hadn't made it. Neither had the baby. From that night on, Michael had learned the only way to survive was to bury it all. The love, the laughter, the grief. To cover it in layer after layer of work until no one, not even himself, could touch it. He never spoke about it. Not to friends, not to family, and certainly not to strangers. So when this little girl, this Amara, spoke the word daughter with such certainty, something in him recoiled. His spine straightened, his features settling into the sharp lines of the man the world knew, the CEO. His voice was no longer tentative. It carried the clipped precision of authority. How do you know about my daughter? Amara didn't shrink back under the weight of his tone. She didn't twist her hands nervously or avert her gaze like so many adults did when he confronted them. She sat as still as a statue, her braids swaying only slightly as the car moved. She told me, Amara said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Michael's brows furrowed. She told you? Yes, Amara replied. Her tone was calm, not dramatic, not seeking attention. I can talk to people who aren't here anymore. And she's been waiting for you to stop talking. The words landed with a strange finality. Stop talking. He didn't even know what that meant. He had built his life on talking, negotiating, commanding, persuading. Silence had no place in his world. His hands curled into fists in his lap, the leather of his gloves creaking under the pressure. This is ridiculous, he snapped, the CEO edge sharpening with each syllable. James, pull over. The driver's voice broke in from the front, quiet but steady. Sir, maybe you should hear her out. Michael's head snapped toward James, his eyes narrowing. In all their years together, James had never interrupted him like that. Never. He was the kind of man who followed orders to the letter, whose job was to drive, not to insert himself into personal matters. "James," Michael said slowly, "this is none of your—" But James kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel just a little tighter. "With all due respect, sir, sometimes the things we don't want to hear are the ones we need the most." Michael stared at the back of James's head, torn between firing him on the spot and demanding an explanation. But then, without warning, his gaze shifted to Amara again. She was watching him, not with smugness, not with pity, but with a strange, quiet patience. And in that look, Michael felt something stir. Not trust, not yet, but curiosity. The kind of curiosity that had built his empire. Still, his pride wasn't ready to surrender. "Fine," he said, leaning back into the seat, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Let's hear this message, since apparently my driver now thinks my car is a confessional." Amara didn't react to the jab. She simply turned her head toward the empty space beside her, the spot she claimed wasn't empty at all. Her eyes softened, and she tilted her head as though listening to someone only she could hear. Then she looked back at him. "She says you don't have to be afraid of the quiet." The words lodged in his chest. He didn't know why, but they did. For years, silence had been his enemy. Silence was where the memories lived. Silence was when Lena's laugh came back, when the faint echo of a lullaby that never got sung reached his ears. Silence was dangerous. And yet, sitting there in the back of his own car, with a stranger who shouldn't know anything about his life, Michael found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He stopped talking. The hum of the engine filled the space between them. Outside, the city rolled past, neon lights flashing, people hurrying through the rain. And in that strange, reluctant stillness, Michael almost thought he heard something faint. Something like a giggle. Michael leaned back slowly, his gaze drifting toward the tinted window, though he wasn't really seeing the streets beyond it. He wasn't sure why he was even letting this conversation go on. Normally, something this bizarre would have been shut down in seconds, dismissed as nonsense, a distraction, a waste of time. And yet, here he was, in his own car, listening to a little girl talk about things she had no business knowing. Amara sat up straighter in her seat, the beads in her braids clicking together with a gentle, rhythmic sound that seemed to fill the quiet between them. Her eyes were steady, not accusing, but watchful. She spoke with a tone that didn't match her years, calm, measured, certain. "She says you've forgotten how to laugh." The words felt like a small stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples through Michael's chest. "You used to sing in the kitchen, remember?" she went on. Michael's eyes flicked to her, sharply now. He didn't remember telling anyone about that. The singing had been one of those small, private things, something only he and Lena had shared. A silly, made-up tune that had no real melody, but it made her smile every time. He'd sing while chopping vegetables, while stirring pasta sauce, while Lena danced around barefoot with her hair tied up. It had been a part of him no one else had seen. Not even James. Amara didn't stop. "You used to hold her mom's hand everywhere you went." A lump formed in Michael's throat, cutting off his breath for a moment. He could see it in his mind. The way Lena's hand fit perfectly in his, the warmth of it, the quiet comfort it gave him, without either of them needing to say a word. He used to reach for her hand instinctively, whether they were crossing the street or just walking through a grocery store. Amara's voice shifted slightly, the softness in it carrying a weight Michael could feel. But now she said, "All you hold is your phone." The image hit him like a blow. He could picture himself, in meeting after meeting, in back-to-back calls, at dinner tables he barely looked up from, his phone in his hand. Always. A lifeline, an excuse, a shield. Something to fill the silence, so he wouldn't have to hear what was in it. Michael swallowed hard, the muscles in his jaw tightening. His throat was so dry it hurt. And then Amara's voice lowered, as if she knew this next part was heavier than the rest. "She says you blame yourself for what happened." His chest constricted. Amara didn't break eye contact. "But it wasn't your fault. She forgives you." And her gaze softened even further. She wants you to forgive yourself. The words lingered in the air, warm and unbearable all at once. Michael's vision blurred slightly, a sting building behind his eyes that he tried and failed to blink away. His heart pounded against his ribs, heavy and uneven, like it was trying to break free. For years, he had carried that blame like armor. It had been easier to believe it was his fault, because then he could at least pretend he had some control over it. Letting go would mean facing the truth, that sometimes the world takes without warning, without reason, and leaves you with nothing but empty hands. His voice faltered, coming out rough and broken. I don't know how. It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. Amara didn't hesitate. She reached out with one small hand and placed it on top of his. Her fingers were warm, her skin soft against his own. It was such a simple gesture, but it was grounding, an anchor in the middle of the storm building inside him. You start by shutting up, she said, her tone matter-of-fact, like this was a step-by-step instruction. Stop filling the air with noise, meetings, calls, and complaints. Sit still. Listen. She's always there. You just don't let yourself hear her. Michael stared at her for a long moment, unable to find a response. Her hand stayed on his, steady and unshaken, until slowly, almost reluctantly, he let out the breath he'd been holding. And for the first time in years, he sat in complete silence. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of an awkward pause, or the impatient quiet before someone speaks. This was different. It was thick, almost alive, like the air in the car was holding its breath with him. He could hear the low hum of the engine beneath them, the faint whir of the tires rolling over the asphalt. The scent of the leather seats mingled with the faintest trace of rain in the air from outside. And somewhere deep inside, under all the layers of noise he'd buried himself in for so long, something stirred. A sound. It was soft at first, almost unrecognizable, a fragment of a memory he hadn't dared to touch. But it grew clearer. Lena's laugh, light and warm, spilling into the kitchen along with the smell of coffee. A lullaby, unfinished but familiar, the kind he had imagined singing to the baby they never got to hold. And then a name he had never been able to say out loud, not since that night. He could hear it in Lena's voice now, whispered gently, as if it had been waiting for years to be spoken again. Michael's eyes closed. He let the memory wash over him, not pushing it away this time. For the first time in as long as he could remember, the silence didn't scare him. When the car rolled to a slow stop outside his building, Michael didn't reach for the door right away. The city around him moved in its usual rhythm, horns blaring in the distance, footsteps on the pavement, the low rumble of buses. But inside the Mercedes, it felt like time had paused. Amara, still holding that calm, knowing expression, pushed the door open. The soft click of her colorful beads brushing against her jacket filled the brief silence. She hopped down to the sidewalk, but before stepping away, she turned back toward him. She says she loves you, Amara said, her voice quiet but certain. Always has. Always will. The words hung in the air, heavy and gentle all at once. For a moment, Michael didn't breathe. He simply looked at her, the late afternoon sun catching in her braids, making the beads glint like tiny drops of light. And then, without another word, Amara blended into the crowd. She didn't run. She didn't even look back. She just disappeared, as though she had stepped out of his life the same way she had stepped in, leaving him with more questions than answers. Michael stayed in the car another moment, his hand resting on the door handle. His chest rose and fell slowly, as though he was trying to steady the rush of emotions clawing their way up from somewhere deep inside. Finally, he stepped out onto the sidewalk. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of fresh rain from earlier in the day. People passed by him, strangers going about their evening, but he barely noticed. Was Amara real? The thought gnawed at him as he walked toward the building's entrance. Was she just a figment of his mind, a hallucination born from years of suppressed grief? Or was she something else entirely, a messenger from a place he didn't understand, carrying words he had needed to hear for far too long? He didn't have an answer, But what he did have was a strange, almost foreign sensation pressing gently against the weight in his chest. Lightness. For the first time in years, the heaviness that had settled over him like a permanent shadow seemed to shift. Not gone, not completely. Grief never truly disappears, but loosened, as though it was giving him room to breathe again. That night, Michael did something he hadn't done in longer than he could remember. He didn't open his laptop. He didn't check his emails. He didn't even reach for his phone. Instead, he walked into the kitchen. The space was quiet, except for the hum of a refrigerator. The marble countertops gleamed under the soft light. Everything was exactly as it always was, perfect, orderly, untouched by life. Michael stood there for a long moment, just listening. And then, almost without realizing it, he began to hum. It was the same silly, tuneless melody he had once sung while chopping vegetables or stirring soup, the one Lena used to laugh at. His voice was rough at first, rusty from years of disuse, but as the notes filled the air, something in him loosened even more. He didn't think about work. He didn't think about deadlines. He just let the sound carry him somewhere else, somewhere warm, somewhere familiar. Halfway through, he caught himself smiling. It wasn't forced. It wasn't for anyone else to see. It was just there. And in that moment, the kitchen didn't feel empty anymore. Somewhere in the quiet, beneath the hum of the fridge and the faint rhythm of his own humming, he thought he heard it, a giggle. Light, quick, and unmistakable. The sound of a child's joy. His humming faltered, but he didn't turn around. He didn't want to break whatever fragile thread connected him to that moment. Instead, he closed his eyes and let the silence settle over him like a blanket. He didn't shut up. He didn't try to fill it with noise. He let the silence speak. And in that silence, he thought he heard it again, the giggle, this time joined by a softer, familiar laugh. Lena's. Michael exhaled, his shoulders relaxing in a way they hadn't in years. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was just his memory playing tricks on him. But for the first time since the night everything had changed, he wasn't afraid to remember. He didn't need proof. He didn't need answers. All he needed was this: the sound of love lingering in the quiet, and the choice to keep listening. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many others need to hear it too. Tap like, share it with someone you care about, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after they end.